We're back, and welcome to Design Talks Now, hosted by Design Pavilion. I'm Eileen Shaw, producer of Design Pavilion and Design Talks, which were created to examine the thinking that goes behind architecture, design of all disciplines, and urban planning. But we're going off program this month to look at other creative fields and how they're facing these times. Kicking off season 2 of Design Talks Now, we present The Seventh Seal, an opera based on Ingmar Bergman's film of the same name. Set in the era of Bubonic Plague, which now, in the time of COVID, has proven art can become reality. In the shadow of COVID-19, the realization of Joao MacDowell's operatic adaptation of the film has been disrupted. Bergman's themes and characters have suddenly become even more relevant, real, and resonant, and now the performing arts must adapt to a post-COVID world. The Seventh Seal opera premiered in 2018 at Stockholm's Modern Art Museum and then in Sao Paulo with a 130-piece orchestra and chorus at the Tatuí Conservatory. The core creatives and producers of the Seventh Seal opera join us today. And I'm very pleased to introduce Joao MacDowell, the composer of the Seventh Seal Opera, and the artistic director of the International Brazilian Opera Company. Noted by the Swedish press as a new thinker in the genre, the Brazilian composer has a career that spans from punk to opera. Joao was awarded twice with the Ingmar Bergman Estate Foundation residencies at the home of the director and invited to perform as the closing act for the opening ceremony for the Bergman Centennial in 2018. Other works by the composer include chamber music, film soundtracks, and songs. Also joining us is Athena Azevedo, the founding executive director of the International Brazilian Opera Company. She launched the project in 2014 with the Brazilian Opera debut concerts. In 2018, Athena was responsible for developing the Seventh Seal concert premieres at the Modern Art Museum in Stockholm. Before coming to the opera company, she worked on development projects with nonprofits and art organizations such as the Berkeley Film Archive and Art Museum, the Mint Museum of San Francisco, Burning Magazine, Vanderbilt Republic, and the East Bay Center for the Performing Arts. Athena continues to be involved in many creative endeavors. We'll meet Alexander MacDowell, Executive Director and Director of Marketing for the International Brazilian Opera Company. He's zooming in today to join us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Alex spearheaded the opera's Bergman Centennial 2018 Brazilian concert premiere. He's also a founding partner of the Con Ethics Cult, a cultural production company. Alex recently conceived of the Live Stream to Alive project, an international online journey of collaboration, engaging creativity, reflection, and art while living in a post-pandemic world. We'll also meet Bengt Gomér, the dramaturge of the Seventh Seal Opera, zooming in from Stockholm today. Bengt is one of Scandinavia's foremost scenographers, working with opera, theater, and on art projects. He studied the history of art and philosophy at Lund University and has worked in set and lighting design at theaters throughout Europe since 1990. He made his directorial debut at Sweden's Valhalla Opera, and now Bengt has 2 world premiere operas upcoming for next season. And I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Voice of America's Adam Phillips, zooming in from New York City. Adam has been a radio journalist and documentarian with the Voice of America since 1993. The recipient of 20 in-house national and international broadcasting awards, Adam frequently reports on the arts, psychology, ecology, and indigenous activism. Today's talk explores themes of creativity, production, archetypes, and catalysts during times of pandemic. And now, let's begin.
Thank you so much, Eileen. That was such a nice introduction, and we're really, really so pleased to be able to have a real conversation about the opera and the film Seven Seal and what it's all based on and its relevance to today. So let's start with Joao and Athena just for the moment. What is the film about, kind of in a very literal sense, and what is it about, kind of in a deeper sense, just sort of in a nutshell?
Well, the film is about the plague. It's about death. It's about facing death. The film follows a knight in a chess game with death, and then he meets this troupe of artists. They see a witch get burned in the forest. It's a journey film. It's like a road movie from the, taking place in the Middle Ages, but it raises a lot of questions about how we face death in desperate times. It also belongs to a tradition of apocalyptic literature. So each time has its own books about the apocalypse, the end of humanity, the end of times, and things like that. And Bergman inserts his play in this tradition by also acknowledging the silence of God, acknowledging that we live in a time when the simple religious explanations and scapegoats are not enough to give us hope towards this presence of death. And we believe that all of these aspects that make it very relevant to the world we live in today.
Yeah, I was going to say, COVID is among us. There are a lot of parallels between this time and that, and also the role of artists, in the midst of all that. I mean, I understand that the main character, I guess you could say he's the main character, the knight and Yoff also, both have sort of opposing roles in terms of the drama and kind of what their different personalities and personas within the opera and the film mean and how they relate to each other. Do you want to say something about how you came to make this opera and why it seemed a good and exciting idea for you to do an opera version of this very iconic film?
In 2014, I was awarded a scholarship for an artistic residency at Ingmar Bergman's home in an island in the Baltic, Fårö. And Bergman had a few homes there. After he died, it became an artistic residency. So you can't visit it like a museum, but if you're an artist, they might select you to be there for a period of time and produce something. So I was working on my third opera, that was Cries and Whispers, which was very loosely inspired by Bergman. In fact, I had the opera already when I realized the story was similar to Bergman, and I asked the foundation for the right to use the title, really. And one thing led to another. When we spoke up to the Bergman Foundation about the Seventh Seal, I was very excited about the idea of doing another opera based on Bergman, and they suggested the Seventh Seal because the other options that we had are, are very performed, scenes from a marriage. We thought about it, and they thought the Seventh Seal was the strongest title, and I was a little intimidated by it because I thought that was like the most iconic Bergman movie, and I thought it was really relevant. But some of our collaborators at the time thought it was very Christian. I think it's really about facing death. What kind of attitude do you come when you have this dialogue with the possibility of dying and with the fact that we're all going to die. And I thought it was very universal and human and extremely well written. So it was a blessing to be granted the opportunity to work on this opera.
It's fascinating. There are all these sort of echoes within your production and also the film itself, because the different characters that collect within the film are sort of everyman. They're sort of almost stock types of human reactions to death. There's a bit of overlap, but they're all very pedigreed views of how to deal with the very objective fact of the end, not only personally, but in terms of the culture, society, and humankind itself. I mean, in a larger sense. If you could just say a little something about how you transpose it, like what's the same and what's different about doing this operatically as opposed to cinematically.
Okay, so Bengt was actually really helpful on this transition from the film script to the opera libretto, because Bengt did the dramaturg, so he helped me a lot through the choices that had to be made. I knew that Bergman referenced every man, and he also referenced Shakespeare, Hamlet, a play inside a play. I had three scripts. I had an original script that was a theater play. I had a script from the film that he was written before he shot the film, and I had the final script that has some differences. after he shot the film. I had to unedit the film a little bit, so we chose 7 characters that were very iconic, and I think that Bergman, while he was writing, he made them a little more human, a little less archetypical, and then we brought them to be a little more archetypical, I think, in the opera. Pretty much everything that you hear in the opera is a line by Bergman. He writes in a very poetic idiom in Swedish. Words have a resonance, and little bits of one word may associate with another word, like, vill du ha lite smultron? Smultron, which is wild strawberries. He uses that as a link to tron, which is faith. So he has like all this inner poetry. So we try to preserve his language as much as possible, although picking and choosing, because a lot had to be the full script is more than 100 pages. The opera is about 30 pages of libretto. So you have to like condense and really choose the most emblematic language and make some choices, like, film cuts, they had to be uncut, so stuff that gets mixed in the film had to be put into a full scene. So there's an arch for those characters, and then you move to another scene, and then you can really develop those characters, and then you bring them together. While in the film you could be cutting from one to the other, and in the opera that's not so good. Could be done, but it's not the best.
Thank you for that. Interesting that you use the word arch. I mean, this is going to be a design talk after all, so let's stay with the architectural metaphor here and talk about the architecture itself of both pieces. And I wanted to ask Bengt to talk a little bit about the challenges of staging it. I mean, without getting too technical, can you tell me what the challenges were in terms of adapting this, and how you actually sort of steered it so that the audience, who would now be presumably a live audience, would be able to receive this in the spirit of the film?
We did a concert recycle, first with a small orchestra, and then with a big orchestra in Brazil. So it's been performed in the full length and in the full capacity of the opera. We've heard every bit of John's music as it should be heard, but we haven't staged it yet. So this is something challenging for us. I normally work as a set designer, and creativity comes from what you take in. And so far, I've been consuming the music, and I know the lyrics and the text very well. So it's cooking. But I mean, then you need to have a space, a stage, or some kind of something to focus upon. And then the true creativity comes. If you have, where is the audience? How big is the stage? Is it depth, high? Is it a black box? And also economics, of course. It's also a budget question. As a general idea, I would go for something simple and not too naturalistic. Some arches that could become outdoor, indoor. You could come through a tunnel. It can go in diagonals. You can work with video on top of it. You can use gauze as walls. So you can work with it as a sort of a metaphor for the world and for time. But this is just what I assume that we are doing, because, when it comes, all of a sudden, COVID came to us, and it changes the reality quite a lot. All of a sudden, plague is around. And of course, what does the chorus look like when they come in the end of the first act, when the flagellants, are they covering their phrases with masks? Or we can go completely into reality and to where we are now, and to the fear that we are all feeling for this disease. And it became very present.
The simplicity of your set reminds me a bit of the simplicity, in a sense, of the different characters in the film. And during COVID, many of us are realizing this, when a lot of the frippery and the noise and the busyness of everyday life has been suspended, and we're all sort of home and kind of have a lot of time to ourselves or with our loved ones, or maybe we're completely alone. It seems like deeper channels of experience are beginning to be revealed, that certain kinds of tendencies within it. You can say it's spiritual, or maybe it's loneliness for some people, but that there's a deeper river that is becoming in the daylight now. I'm thinking that maybe your set will help sort of underscore that, especially during the COVID era, and also reveal these character types and what the meaning of all this is.
João started the project in 2013. He collaborated with Bengt to revise the libretto to make it shortened for a theatric opera format because everything takes longer to sing. And then we tested the opera out in concert previews, first in New York City, and then later on, whenever we got to the full score, we produced it during the Bergman Centennial in 2018. At that point, we produced and showed it during Bergman Week, Bergman Vecten, at the Museum of Modern Art in Stockholm. And then we took that same cast that we had from the Stockholm team and we brought them to Brazil. And Alex actually helped us produce a concert there with a full orchestra and a full chorus with the Tattooee School. And then later on, we went to Ilhabela and performed as a concert in the middle of a jungle. It was on an island. And so it kind of was an interesting arc of the whole creative process, at least to that stage, because it went from composing on an island where Bergman himself lived to performing the full concert and testing the music out as a full concert on another island, but in a tropical place. So we're bridging these two very disparate worlds together with this opera piece.
Seems like there's so much of art imitating life in this, and art becoming life, and the sort of the boundaries that we're used to between life and death, and art and not art and life, and Bergman and Joao. It seems like it's all kind of sort of melting together in this very interesting way.
About Banks' portion of it, he followed us along the way from the working on the dramaturgy, the score, the libretto. He gave a lot of advice in terms of the casting. He worked us working out the casting. He gave stage direction for the concerts and the lighting and the look of that. So he's been studying this. And the phase we're in right now is the challenges we're working to get it to staging. And we've been talking to different opera houses about that with the hopes to get it performed. And in that midst, it's been interrupted by COVID because a lot of the concert houses and theaters have been closed in the US and across Europe relatively indefinitely. The question now is, how do you imagine the staging without a stage? How do you stage without a stage? Is this very philosophical conundrum. Joao and I just had a little baby girl on February 5th. She's actually sleeping on our lap right now, quietly. And whenever COVID hit and we found ourselves leaving New York in the middle of the night and feeling like it was the end of the world, and we were kind of in our own mini apocalypse of sorts. And shall I say, it doesn't compare to some of the other tragic situations that other people are in different parts of the world. Everyone's going through their own, there's different people going through different dramas, but we were experiencing leaving New York, feeling like we had to get somewhere safe with our baby. So we went to my mother's in Pennsylvania. And in order to quarantine, we actually stayed in her camper, RV camper in her backyard for nearly 5 weeks initially in initial quarantine without really having any outside contact. They were giving us food. We had a separate bathroom.
This is similar to the film and the opera, right? Where the artist and his wife and their performers, they're artists, but they're also travelers, just like you were. And the baby is basically the same age almost, too.
Almost, yeah, that representation of like hope, of like, okay, the world's falling apart, but then there's this new life coming. So we really felt ourselves inside of the drama, and it felt very surreal to be working on pushing this opera forward, which had this main crux of the story of having these characters working to continue telling the story, and scapegoats emerging, people pointing fingers. We saw in the sense of response to this idea of death and wearing the masks, all of a sudden when you're on the streets and someone passes you by, you're questioning, who are you? And you're wondering if they could potentially be death, which is really the opening scene of the story of the Seventh Seal. It's death confronting the night, and they have this whole conversation of, who are you? I am death. Are you ready? All of a sudden we became the ones who are questioning our neighbors in that sense.
For those who don't know, the Seventh Seal deals with the story of a knight who's coming back from the crusades and meets death and challenges death for a chess game. We chose 7 archetype characters, which is a way, middle-aged theater worked very much. Who are you? I am death. So that's one character. The knight is another character. He's a very noble, religious guy. The squire is another character. He is an existentialist, atheist, agnostic philosopher. He's seeing things more like a modern person who's not so tied down by religion would see. And they're always talking, in this dialogue about death between this more agnostic existentialist modern perspective against the knight who has this more traditional religious perspective, and is very troubled by why is God not doing anything about all this death and suffering. A witch, who is this scapegoat, she's just a 16-year-old girl who was framed as a devil worshiper, and then people burn her because they think she is responsible for the plague, and we see a lot of this, in fake news, a lot of scapegoating going on nowadays, similarly. And then the last two characters, they represent the artists, Joff and Mia. They are also metaphorically a little bit of Joseph and Mary with the baby Jesus. They're the ones who survive. They also provide the moment of communion that we have, this strawberries and milk in the summer afternoon. Everybody is happy before they go into this dark section of the film where they enter this forest. It's all very symbolic in a very direct way, not like this symbol that you need to, so it's very straightforward. Writing an opera is a design challenge, if you want, because it's very easy to start an opera and not end it. A great Brazilian opera composer who got a lot of recognition in Italy in the 1800s, Carlos Gomes, he had a problem finishing a lot of operas. So for 10 years, he was writing just first acts. When we started this opera, I was very much afraid that I wasn't going to be able to end it. So I looked for a very designed structure. So before I even touched the music too much, I was writing down, okay, these are the 7 characters that I have. These are 7 solo singers. I'm going to be writing for these parts. I want to be them somewhat well distributed for the singers to have something substantial to grab, but not also too much. There's no one singer that carries the whole opera. The number of scenes that we're going to have needs to be manageable for a production and all of that, all these very practical, technical considerations. And there was an arch of building this whole score that started in 2014 when I was in Bergman's home and ended in the production that Alex did in Ilhabela. When we presented the opera in the Ilhabela concerts, we have an opera, we have a full score. From that, we can go to the next stage, which is, giving that score also visual elements, costumes, scenery, light, design, action, movement, and that's the next stage. But having gone through the first step, we have an opera. And at the end of this journey, it was a very demanding, heroic journey for the two of us, especially. And we didn't have the baby yet. We planned to have a baby after we finished this music. But at the very end of it, when everybody had gone home, all the actors had already departed, all the production, and I was left with Athena alone in this house where we were in Ilhabela. She came out the shower crying, and she was like, "Oh, we are Joff and Mia." And that was kind of premonitory because we went through this challenge of really trusting faith and diving into it and trusting the people that we had around us that were really giving so much support. Alex and Bank, first and foremost, but everybody who joined, about 300 people joined in this production that supported the project in one way or another.
The whole project since the very beginning, it's involved in a kind of a magic atmosphere. There's a lot of interesting things since the beginning. The whole thing starts with a Brazilian guy, a Brazilian contemporary composer, composing an opera in Swedish from one of the most important filmmakers in the world about his masterpiece. So this is something already very interesting. And then we are making this, since the beginning, I'm making an international connection that involves 3 different continents. We are talking about Brazil and South America, Europe, and Sweden, and then the companies in the US. So we are putting together different things, mixing culture, mixing thoughts, very different contributions. So the project already was a journey putting those things together. And that story that was told that made it also very interesting. So a project that started in a Swedish island, premiere in a Brazilian tropical island. And now you're moving to the next stage to put the whole thing on stage, and then came up the COVID, and you're paralyzed and very frustrated for all the different bad aspects that everybody knows, but also mainly in the cultural environment. You see immediately when people has to be at home, you started to see the artists giving hope and joy with the concerts online or singing in the verandas. So we started to see a lot of interesting thing going on, and that was completely related with the movie. The whole story, it's so interesting that we have an opportunity to contribute in this moment of rupture and adversity. There's so many interesting insights to share and to discuss and to bring to the audience. To make this kind of reflection, existential, philosophical, economical. Let's use this and understand all of those movements, the way that people are getting together through those lives, everybody trying to do things, trying to understand how to do things in this adversity, in this environment. So why not let's create through this together? Let's do something different from now. Our goal is still to make this opera alive on stage in the future, that we don't know how, and that's what Ben was talking about, how is going to be this stage, etc. So this is so interesting, so inspiring questions. So why shouldn't we share this process of creating the next step of the creation of the opera, putting together the other creativity elements? This is a journey that could be shared.
I understand you have this live stream that you're planning to do, a new platform, a new kind of iteration of this project. Could you tell me what's it called and what's it about?
So it's Live Stream to Alive. It's a journey, international inspirational journey of creativity and innovation, that we are going to make a series of episodes online. So we're creating a platform where you're going to show the creativity team that will be discussing this. So João, Bengt, and the costume designer. It's going to be on time and online. So it's an opportunity to people to understand, to see, to share, to know the backstage. So how those artists think and how they put things together. So sharing scenes of the movies, sharing maybe Bengt sharing what he thinks that might work in this future that we don't know. There is also a beauty in this process. So this is a line, and together with this, debating fear, death. So how people are dealing with those things that Tina were saying. So it's a two parallel series of episodes: the creation, the creativity process of creation, and those debates about this, and interaction also with the opportunity to participation of the audience. So let's put people together now, individuals, companies.
It's going to be launching in late September, I understand.
Exactly. 7th Seal launched in September in the web.
And I just want to add to that, it's a really exciting opportunity, because it's so often that people talk at large that the arts help improve society and give back to society, and there's this relationship and dialogue, the role of the artist and the role of performing arts in terms of having a dialogue with how people are dealing with their own personal psychological issues, but then also social issues. And it's easier to say, but sometimes you don't have the opportunity to put that into practice. So we actually have this opportunity of sharing behind the scenes, more or less, before the production happens instead of after the production happens, to be able to open up this dialogue in a very candid, honest way of how the themes of apocalypse that the Seven Seals brought up and how the characters deal with it, how that also reflects on our society now, and how we're dealing with as a globe. How are we dealing with this apocalypse that we're experiencing in COVID, and what is the new world that we're working towards emerging from? So it allows us to help bring these conversations up in a way before the production even happens. And instead of having those conversations happen on the sidelines between individuals, we get a chance to facilitate a little bit of it. You know, there are many different kinds of conversations that will happen, but we can generate content to facilitate how to imagine that future. So it's an exciting part of it.
I was thinking about the transparency that you're trying to achieve, and how my first thought was, well, that's so different than the kind of things that the artists in the film were trying to do. But when you think of how flimsy the curtains were, and how you could see the wiring under the boards with their little performances, with their juggling and their commedia dell'arte thing, that was also transparent in a way. Ben, could you tell us about a little bit sort of the very concrete things that you have to think about moving sets from location to location, how you create an outdoor set from the point in terms of, COVID safety and social distancing? And I'm wondering what the challenges and perhaps the possibilities are with COVID, so front and center in terms of a future production.
In outdoor is very much an option, but the theaters are opening more and more now here in Europe, and the opera houses are assuming to perform in October, September, end of September, October, limited audiences, but at least everything is starting up again. So we are hopefully seeing stage productions very soon with a live audience. This is happening more and more in Sweden and in Germany and France, all around Europe.
Keying off what Alex was talking about, I'm wondering if there's new possibilities. I mean, that COVID might actually make possible a production that might be richer in a different way than would be possible when there's a traditional theater and a house. Is there a new kind of perception that we can have that wouldn't have been possible without this catastrophe?
That might be an option, of course, to perform more like in a live situation among people, and sort of making the audience being a part of the actual square scene or something like that. That opens up if you have to perform in the woods or something like that, or have the stage on a lake or something like that to keep a distance. Or there are many different opportunities that might come up. But I was thinking about this. Of course, COVID changed view on this piece, but it's been going on for quite some time. When we started to talk about this play long before COVID, we were talking about apocalyptic movements in the world, environmental disasters, economical disasters, different political movements in different directions, and very unsuitable presidents in different continents, and so it's been going on for quite some time. It's the parallel to the Seventh Seal medieval story from Bergman and updated to today. So that was long before COVID. We realized that it's happening actually parallel to what we're trying to achieve. And also the presence and the meaning of art in the society is, of course, part of the story. Very much the story. I mean, the artists are the only ones that survive in the end, and brings hope and brings things to the next level, where they are reflecting on the apocalyptic themes in the play and in the film, and talking about fear, talking about possibilities, talking about hope, talking about community, sharing and everything, not just being afraid and running away and screaming, we're all going to die, it doesn't matter, we just have to give up. This is opposite. The artists are doing the absolute opposite. They are bringing the themes up, continuing to discuss everything very intensively and important, and also the joy side of life. And this I think, this is what we all need to do today as well, because that's what art needs to do all the time, and it should do, and it has to do, and it's doing.
It's interesting what you're saying about the art, and I wouldn't necessarily, maybe before COVID, have thought of the role of the artist as being one that's hopeful per se, but maybe it's the job of the artist to be wherever everybody else isn't, so that if everybody else is freaked out and there's a terrible fear brought in the land, so they say, hey, well, it's sort of like the other way too, or maybe if people are sort of hysterically happy in a manic way, the artist says, yeah, well, there is death around the corner, so don't get too happy. And of course, the artist in the film and the opera sees beyond the machinery that everybody else is so caught up in. He has these beautiful visions very early in the film where he sees the Virgin Mary walking the Christ child, and he sort of sees sort of beyond, sort of a concentric circle that's bigger and larger, more fundamental and astounding than the one that everybody else is so caught up in their positions. And I'd like to bring in this scene about the strawberries and the milk, which to me is one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever seen in film. And I think, Athena, you have something very interesting to say about that. Maybe you could describe that scene a little bit and talk about the sort of more maybe contemplative or joyous or in the moment attitude that some of us have during the pandemic.
That scene itself, Mia's with the baby Mika. And then the night he comes upon the scene and he meets them and they have a conversation, and then Joff joins them. And Joff says, "Oh, please join us for a very simple meal. We've gathered strawberries from the field and we have milk here." And then the night squire comes with another woman that they've helped along the way. And so it's a scene with all these characters together in the beautiful sunny day. It's like the middle, in the midst of the storm of everything falling apart, we can still stop and check in with each other. And with COVID, I feel like that's one thing that became very clear, and people immediately were text messaging each other across the globe. "Are you okay? Is your family all right?" We didn't have a grasp on how it was going to affect us, and everyone was potentially at threat. And so we were all checking in with each other, and that was very important. And I think the quarantine that followed, where everyone has been on lockdown and had to really stop and think about life and focus on their family and their friends and whatever projects they were doing at the time, that contemplative moment is like the quiet in the hurricane, the quiet in the storm, and the communion that emerged as a result is so important.
I mean, it's the Buddhist thing. If all life is suffering, why are we here? Why Hamlet, why not just kill yourself if life is this meaningless thing, with a bear bodkin when he himself could end. And Bergman's answer to it is the justification for life is because we have art and we have each other. He kind of puts the two things together. We have art because art produces these moments of communion. And independent of it being a happy play or a sad play, if you look at the performance, the theater inside the theater in The Seventh Seal, it's very humoristic, but they're talking about death. They're talking about the shadow walks on the beach, the death is approaching you, even though they're talking about all these humoristic, surrealistic situations. It could be dramatic and serious, it could be humorous and light, but the artist brings people together in a moment. And if we cannot beat death in the long run, because we're all going to die, we can beat death in right now, in being present here with each other. And this is what we're doing. We are here united by this moment, united by, the planet that holds us all together in this journey through the universe. And there's a reason to be alive. The reason to be alive is because we can produce art. We can do something with our lives that's bigger than just being alive by being together, and when we do this, we have this strawberry moment when we are together and we can win over death, even if it's for a single moment of joy in this thing that we create.
So life is so hard and we don't know what's going to happen and people dying all around us, but wow, this milk, this fresh milk is so delicious. Have a sip and we'll just be together until the next moment tells us what to do.
It's, of course, very complex, and we don't know exactly what Bergman meant. But I assume that you're pointing into sort of a direction that we thought of as an option.
I understand that you've already done some online productions yourself after COVID. I mean, you're no newbie in all this.
Exactly. We did Don Giovanni from Berwaldhallen in Stockholm, produced live with no audience in the auditorium, and also a concert from Royal Philharmonics in Stockholm. It's necessity. We have to communicate. We have to be there. Everybody involved in the arts needs to show our presence in society. The bad thing in Sweden, at least, is the lack of money for artists. People are falling free, no incomes. and there's not so many opportunities to work. So people are trying to invent things, but it's very difficult to get the costs covered.
I'm thinking about story also. Someday this will make a great story. My brother has a great line. He says, when something bad happens, he says, someday this will make a great story. Not today, but someday it'll be a great story. And I'm wondering about the role of story in all this. I mean, having myths. I mean, it's true that, maybe we don't believe necessarily in the literal Christian idea of retribution and flagellation and the end times. But at the same time, I'm wondering if anybody has a comment about the role of storytelling in helping us to cope with the difficult time, because that is what we tell each other things mean. We have to construct it somehow.
There's the art, and the artist doing something in this new way, in this new moment where everything is online. One challenge is make this happen, right? It's a new concept of project. So in a production perspective, there's a challenge in itself. But another challenge is also to understand this moment and go through this moment to trying to get to another moment. So there's a story in the name, in the concept of the project. Making history, not only advertising, of course, they have to create the history together, creating the story together.
I think that's interesting what Alex is saying, though. It's the idea is the show must go on, life must go on, and the story must be told by somebody. And who's telling the story? Alex is asking the question, if everyone is participating, we are all telling the story together. It becomes greater than just the one role of the artist telling the story. We're sharing in that responsibility to frame how we respond to this moment, to life, to fear, to the unknown.
Linking that this aspect that Alex was talking about to this idea that the artists are the bearers of hope in this story. In the play, the artists are the one who offer this bowl of wild strawberries and milk to all the travelers in this beautiful moment of happiness that we have in the center of the film. It's interesting because the first time we see Joff in the film, he's talking to the horses, and he asks the horses if they can teach him how to eat grass, because it's very hard to survive as an artist in those dark times. Yeah. This is actually a section of the film that didn't make into the opera. We don't have those lines, in the music, but it's remarkable that the first thing we know of him is that he's an artist and he's struggling to survive because, in difficult times, people, first thing they stop spending money is on art. That seems superfluous. But yet, at the same time, the first thing that gives them hope to continue is the art that they see. So we saw that during COVID. A lot of people performing Ravel's Bolero is a super popular classical piece, and showing them in isolation, going through these times. And the artists were the ones who provided this hope that got people through the challenge of being isolated. My perception of society was as being held together by this community of artists who went online, who produced things with no money, because there was no money for COVID, hopeful. There was no money for that, but the artists, they did it anyway, because it's the mission of the artist to provide a narrative, a story that brings sense, some kind of justification to being alive in this, through all of that. And then artists also need to survive, also needs to pay the rent, and they'll go to the supermarket. So someone like Alex, who's actually dedicating his life to finding means to bring money to artists so that we can also survive through this challenge and continue bringing back to society this hope.
To me, this conversation goes back to the archetype and the broadening of the idea of the archetype. We might say the artist, but it's important that we don't isolate that as like one type of person that actually has a career as an artist. I think it's important to say that it's representative of the creator and the person who creates and makes. In COVID, we've come to a time where everyone had to learn how to create again. We had to learn how to keep business going and respond and go through Zoom and communicate this way that we're doing right now. And we all became creators in this sense. And that attitude is what causes survival. It's not that you're just an artist, it's the attitude of creation. And the other alternate responses, you could be the one persecuting. And I bet all of us were at some point. I know that in our life, whenever my brother brought in a stranger into our home and didn't tell me, I was pretty upset. You know, I was the one persecuting him for being irresponsible. And that, I think a lot of people ended up encountering moments where there's so many different feelings around tolerance for COVID and how secure and isolated to be and how much not to. We did point fingers even at the ones that we love, which is not a normal feeling that we would normally have to confront. Each of these characters give us an opportunity for response, and celebrating the ability to create is the power of this Seventh Seal story. Bergman did a brilliant job designing a piece that I think he said, if you go deep into yourself and find what's really intimate to you, you find what's relevant to the world. And we're discovering that right now. In his original story, we've experienced something in our lives, and the story was living out there. And as Bank said, it related to some things in the world, you know, related to what's going on with global warming. It relates to the wars that we're experiencing globally, even before COVID. And then when COVID happened, all of a sudden it became very real and very personal. And we discovered that the story had this longevity. It really stuck with your individual experience.
Fascinating. We could talk about her at the kitchen table, but unfortunately this isn't the kitchen table. One day it will be, and I'll meet you there. Any last words?
I'm really happy we're connecting and working to get the opera to stages. I think it's one of the best pieces of literature that I know of, you know, and I was a literature major, so I read a lot at some point. The way I had to do it, it was very short time to produce an opera for Bergman's centennial that was coming up, you know, so I had 4 years to write the opera, which is a short time, incredible as it seems, because it's a big construction. And I'm very happy with the result. I'm very happy with the music. It's been a year since we produced it. I really look forward to seeing it on stage with actors and with the production that Alex is putting together and with the ideas that Bengt has been cooking up for the performance itself. And I wish that we get it on stage as soon as possible so that people can experience that and share.
I'd like to invite you all to join and watch Seventh Seal in live stream to Alive that's going to be on in September in the website livestreamtoalive.com. So I hope to see you there and see the rest of this history.
Well, that's really wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you all for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. I've learned so much. And thank you, Design Talks, so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about this so deeply.
The creativity process of an opera in this context has been a great opportunity. Thank you a lot, Design Talks.
All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Adam, Athena, Joao, Alex, and Bengt for sharing your incredible story of coincidence. There's a dialogue between art and reality where one influences the other. And how fitting and crucial for us to see that artists in times of crisis survive, symbolically winning over strife when all else is lost. The power of the imagination shapes our reality. And I thank you all for joining us. We'll continue to look at creatives working in parallel fields. It's the energy and ideas that we need as we enter a new season in our challenging world. So please stay tuned and continue to stay safe, stay smart. Design stands together.